Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me tonight is going to be Michael Sand, and we're going to talk about one of his most recent books, How to Manage an Effective Religious Organization, and it features many ideas for improving on, this congregation. And this is really, I think, a topic that almost anybody that's in any kind of organization can use, even though it's really geared toward religion. The one thing I thought I would say to everybody before the show started is that this is really actually most targeting the administrative end of the organization. So we're not going to be discussing churches or religions in the, aspect of beliefs and dogma or anything of that nature. We're really just discussing the administrative end. And I thought I'd mention that before somebody called in and asked another question and we wouldn't be able to answer it. But I will have different guests in the future that will be targeting that. I know I do from time to time, so keep checking back in. So, Mike, how are you doing today?
Fine, thank you, Royce. Glad to talk to you.
Oh, I'm glad to talk to you, and I'm glad we finally got hooked back up over that little mishap that happened the last time, and now we're able to go ahead and finish what we got started. You know what I'm saying?
Good.
But this here, you got a new approach. I've seen how-to books on almost everything out there, but I think yours is the first one on a how-to for religious organizations. How'd you come up with that idea?
I had done a lot of work in reference to my first book, which was How to Manage an Effective Nonprofit, and then I had done several grant work with churches, mostly in terms of board development and strategic planning. And as I worked with churches, I would ask them, well, what books do you use, pastor or father, to run your church? Or some of the larger churches now have full-time professionals, and they said there aren't any books. And I said, what do you mean? There's over 1 million churches in the United States. There's no book that tells you how to run your church, or if you're in the pews, how to deal with the church and what questions to ask. And so I did a lot of research, hoping to find somebody who wrote the book, and I didn't have to, and it wasn't out there. So the long story got short, which is I figured I had to have to write this book for not only the preachers and the administration, but also the people in the pews as to what kind of questions they should ask about the management of their particular religious organization.
Well, I come from a religious family. My father was a Pentecostal pastor. One of his ex-wives still is a Pentecostal pastor, and majority of my family is Christian. I would imagine some of the folks in my family would probably be, glad to get a hold of a book like that, especially Janice, who does that kind of, is an ordained minister anyway, right. In other words. But
well, I found that out, too, that the ministers, no matter what the faith were, and I interviewed ministers of many faiths, they all said the same thing. They said no matter whether we're evangelic or whatever we are, when we were in pastor school, we didn't have a course in fundraising or grant writing. And so every pastor of all the religions I talked to said the same thing, that they were just not trained in these management tools.
So basically then that would explain why I've been to so many different churches that were barely getting by.
Right.
They were always asking the congregation for ideas for fundraisers. Right. And, you can go from one church to the next and there's different offices and some of them only have a pastor and that's it. And,
that's right.
It's also helter-skelter because nobody ever learned management, I guess.
Right. That's right.
Well, I imagine they'd be a lot more successful if they were better managed.
That is for sure, and that's what they tell you, that they really welcome this, and if they were better managed, right? It's not only the fundraising, a lot of it is in terms of getting more members and making more members happy. The fundraising is just one part of management. There's lots of other parts of management that are going to make you have a better church, in addition, of course, to the fundraising.
Yeah, I know that's been a really big issue, is how to get more members in your church. And some people say, well, free Sunday dinners or, this kind of event. That I'm pretty sure that you have some pretty down to earth ideas in your book that are probably less, shall we say, more cost effective.
Sure. Well, one of the things, for example, that I say to every religious organization is, do you have a brochure? When somebody comes to visit you and says, what does your church do you have a piece of paper that tells them, we have services such and such a time, this is what our mission is, here's what our address is, if you want more information, here's how you get it. Just an absolute basic brochure, which costs very little these days because you can put it together right on your computer, to give to anybody like that. So that's one way of doing it. Another one is just basically simple things like to make sure that every single person that walks in your door gets greeted. So there's a membership committee, and if you walk in the door of a church and you're not a member, somebody comes up to you. I mean, you're simple, and how you doing, and nice to see you, and then also gets your telephone number, your email address, and gives you a call next week and says, would you like to, come next Sunday? I'll be happy to go with you, and also I understand you have a kid that could join our Boy Scout troop at our church. Would you like me to have somebody talk to him? So a lot of it is not great rocket science, but just ideas that you should have anyway. And all we're saying is let's put them into place, and let's think really clearly about how we get new members for our church.
Well, I got to tell you, Mike, what I'm hearing from you is ideas that not only help improve the size of your congregation, but also improves the involvement, because some of the stuff you're talking about is things that get people actually actively involved.
That's right. That's right. And one of the ways, again, when you start this, I'm thinking a lot of these ideas I'm putting in the book, but everybody should have them anyway, is to talk to the people and say, what do you want to be involved in? If you're a senior citizen, how'd you like to come to our senior citizen luncheon program? And if you're of school age, please come to our school age program. So I think part of it is just doing that. Also in that brochure that I talked about, one of the things is list your programs. So you list them, and if somebody is interested in a Sunday school, they know who to contact. Or so if you have a church choir, it says if you're interested in the church choir, contact the choir master. So just an absolute list of the different programs of the church, because every church, everyone has two things. One, they have the worship, and that's good too, just, the worship hours and stuff. But the other that we don't think about is the 5 or 10 or 15 different things that the church does. They have a youth program, a senior program, whatever the different activities are. Just list them that way. You can go to a family and say, well, are you interested in such and such? And somebody says, sure, like a lot of churches have a singles program. Well, that's good if you're a single program person in your 20s. Knowing that church has a singles program, that's all you care about. You sometimes aren't going to go to Sunday services, but you may go to that dance or something that's for single people. So I think just listing what you do is a simple tool for increasing attendance and participation.
I can see how that would help. Right here in Houston, we have one really, really, really huge church that started out as a little shack, a little feed store, and it grew and it moved locations, and it's got so huge that it's in a huge building with 2 different services,
right.
And it's televised. You'll know it when I say it. Lakewood Baptist Church, Joel Edelstein. I can't imagine nobody have not heard of it.
Right.
And he does that. He lets everybody know around town, that they have care for their kids or whatever they're doing. And he's always got something going on. And, I think he's probably gotten tips from you there, because he's got a really big thing going over there.
Right. Well, and he knows the answer, that once you get involved in a kids thing or you get involved in a seniors thing, then you start coming to Sunday services, that it usually, I would guess, is more that way than the other way, that you start going to services and then you get involved. And I think that the big church pastors have, that's what they realize, that you get them in the door not on Sunday, but on the other 6 days, and then you're more than likely to going to come to the traditional services. And you're also going to contribute money. That's part of it too, that once you get involved one way or the other, that then when you come on Sunday and they pass around the plate or however they fundraise, you're going to tend to give more money. I think one goes with the other.
I would tend to think you're probably right. And then, too, there will be some events that, by necessity, you might never have to charge for, depending on what they were, that you were shooting for.
Sure.
It's turning winter in here. We're in that edge where it's one day hot, next day cold type thing, and it's causing my, allergies to kind of go haywire on me. So pardon that little frog in the throat there. But yeah, I've seen some of this here stuff that you're talking about, and all of it, like you say, it makes a whole lot of common sense. And there's so much stuff that so many people, well, they don't have a business background. They've been to Bible college and they've gotten their minister, ordination, the license, in other words. But like you say, that doesn't cover the business aspect. And
right.
Well, church is a business just like anything else.
It is, and a lot of times, too, the bigger churches may have a business administrator or a somebody who is expert in that. But when you actually look at churches around the country, the vast majority, or the one that you described, it's one pastor. That's the only paid person, the pastor and a half-time secretary. And when you're the pastor of a church like that, you are expected by the parishioners to know all this other stuff. And you just don't. It wasn't in your education. It's not that you're not interested. It's just that you weren't trained that way. Or you're not interested. Some of the pastors say, well, you know what, I was hired to preach. I wasn't hired to, run a capital campaign. I don't know anything about that.
And there's a church that'll never expand.
That's right. Or else I know some pastors don't even know how to use email. They say, hey, I don't need an email. And I'm thinking, well, in our modern life, one of the things that any church should do, and this is another thing, is to have their membership on that computer so that the computer can push the button to say how many people, we have a senior citizen dinner, let's just invite those people, or we have a youth program, and they can target parts of their membership. Well, that's a basic thing that any church or any organization should be able to do, but they're not going to do it if the computer isn't there, or if the minister doesn't know how to do that basic task, unless in some churches, obviously, one of our recommendations is if you don't have the skills, at least you have a church council, and have a business person on your church council or somebody who knows how to use that computer. So that's another way of doing it. If you're the pastor and you don't have the skills, at least call on some of your volunteers who might.
And I think they'll find out also that a lot of people, they're looking for something to do. I mean, my wife loves to go to church because she loves to go to the knitting class.
There you go.
She wants something to go do away from home, to get out of the house. I mean,
and a lot of people do that. As a matter of fact, it really should be emphasized that many churches have programs that are not related to religion. They're related to meeting people like your wife and doing some good. Sometimes it's for good in the community. We haven't talked about that, but lots and lots of churches have soup kitchens, or they do things for the needy as part of the church rather than other things that they might. And that's something that churches have done throughout history of helping the needy and the poor, and it's the same thing. You go to your members and say, who would like to help with getting food for the food bank this week, and you'll find a group of people who are interested in doing that. It really is. It's not that complicated. You have to spell out what you want and have some sort of a way of meeting your members. The other problem is that too many churches, the way they do it is they make the announcement on Sunday. Well, then they forget that half the people aren't there that Sunday, and they don't know that a food bank thing is coming up. So one of the things that church has to do, and again, it's very simple, is have some sort of a brochure or email. Then you have the other problem I've seen in churches where they say, well, we're going to save money and do it in email, and they do it, and then they don't realize that a quarter of their members don't have email. A lot of elderly people just don't have email, and if you don't send it to them by regular mail to let them know that there's a senior citizen luncheon, they're not going to know. So you have that issue of whether or not your particular congregation, whether the people have email or not, and some do, some don't.
And that is true. Not everybody's moved. I mean, especially amongst your elderly people, a lot of people aren't on the, it's kind of beyond their time now, in other words, for that. They're in their 80s and they're not looking to learn a new skill. And I don't mean that by disrespect or anything. I'm just saying, realistically speaking, in other words.
Right. But the other thing you have to realize is the old system still works best, especially with the elderly. You get a call from your neighbor down the street that says, Sally, we're going to the lunch on Tuesday. Can I pick you up? Because remember, a lot of the elderly people have a transportation problem, and some friend down the street comes and picks them up. They'll go, whereas if nobody calls them, they won't go. So you have that issue, too, of if you're dealing with a population like that, you have the question, one, of how you let them know what's happening. I found that true, though, of all segments of religious organizations, that you can tweet them and send them notices all you want, but there's no substitution to their buddy down the street saying, listen, are you going to be at the meeting on Wednesday? That still is better than any other way of reaching people.
Especially when their buddy has a car and they don't.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, sure, I'm coming. You're going to pick me up, right?
Right. That's right. Hey, I'll be there Sunday at 9:30, and you're going to be ready. And pretty much you don't want to say. And the other thing about elderly people is that's a group of people also that is interested in keeping up with the community and having friends. And if you go out, the likelihood is they'll go, especially since they're getting stuff for free and or for 50 cents or $1, and that's also a way to keep up with nutrition and to make sure also that if you need some help, there's somebody from the church community. If they find out you're in need of going to drive into the doctor, there's all kinds of benefits that you get for church people by having them come, and then you can see whether they need these other services.
Right.
So it's there's a lot of advantages of doing that. I mean, we've talked about one of just filling the pews, but there's lots of other reasons to get people in your building the other 6 days.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. And I mean, for one thing, if you have a busy community and they're active at the church, they're not active in other places, it could be getting them into mischief.
Right. I think that's true, and then that's the purpose of the church too. That if you've got young people, one of the things that we all sincerely believe is if you get those young people in the church for their activities, like you say, they're sure going to be better off than out in the street dealing with the street guys. So we have this belief that being in the church, no matter what age you are, with no exceptions, you're better off than being other places because you're learning whatever you want to call them, morals or values or something like that. We have this strong belief, all of us, that being in a church is a good thing.
Okay, now also I wanted to mention to all the listeners, because not everybody listens at my website. Some people listen at Shoutcast or iTunes or on their smartphone or, whatever the case may be, that Michael's website is www.organazation, mike.sandassociates.com. And also his book can be found at Amazon, and I've got it linked on my site as well. And when I put it in the archives, I'll also have it linked over there in the archives as well. And you can reach my site at www.paranormalpalace.com and keep up, sign up and get my newsletter and be kept informed of upcoming shows as they're happening. All kinds of other good stuff, like you could join in the chat room while we're talking over here and ask questions in the chat room as well. And also, just now remembered I wanted to give out my telephone number because I don't see it on the page, and I usually put it up there with the actual show, and it looks like I forgot to do that today, but it's 832-632-7904. Feel free to call in and ask a question. I'll try to get to you as quick as I can. Sometimes when I'm talking, I don't like to, or the guest is talking, I don't like to interrupt to pick up a phone, but I know, and I'll also let you know, Mike, that sometimes it only rings so many times before it goes to call notes, and I may have to go ahead and interrupt to answer it. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
But I'll like to make sure everybody knows that. And also want to mention my friends over at UnitedParanormalInternational.ning. It's a great place to go. It's a social network, and well, they're out here trying to provide a place where there's not a lot of drama going on like some of the other places where you join the group and it's just a big warfare, you know. So I like to throw them out there every now and then as I'm able to. But Mike, I know you covered a lot of different subjects in your book other than getting people into the congregation. One of the things you mentioned in this here was about hiring religious leaders. And that's a very important step, putting the right man in the right job, in other words.
Right. Right. And there what you do as a congregant is you find out the rules of your own congregation. One of the things is that there's lots of different models in terms of a religious leader. And your first obligation as a congregant is to ask the question, how does our particular denomination get a religious leader? For example, if you're Catholic, that your religious leader is sent to you. I mean, you don't pick the religious leader, but even if you're Catholic, you want to say to the council, say, you know what, this time let's get a younger fella because a lot of our members are younger. So why don't you write a note to the bishop and ask for a younger pastor or an older pastor, or you can still have input. I've met with some Catholic priests who made the point to me that even though the bishop is going to appoint the religious leader, they still want input from the members of the congregation. So that's an example. Most Protestant churches, not all of them, pick their own religious leader. The group does. Well, then the question is, who's the committee? How does the committee get formed in our church to interview people? And then who finally makes the decision? Again, in some churches, the board makes the decision. In some churches, the congregation makes the decision. So you want to ask that question: who makes the final decision as to who our religious leader is? You have other models. For example, in some churches, like the Baha'is and the Mormons, they don't pay their religious leader. So that's a whole other model. The religious leader in those two churches are volunteers. And then you have the Eastern Quaker model. Not all Quaker models, but in most of our churches in the East, the Quaker churches don't have pastors at all. So they don't have religious leaders. So your first question is, who picks our religious leader? And then you try to have as much input as you can. I've been disappointed with some people who say, gee, they're not happy with so-and-so, the religious leader that just got started, and we said, well, did you ask questions? Were you on the committee? Did they, one of the things, for example, I think is important is if the council has a candidate that they're interested in, I think that they should have the candidate make a sermon before that particular congregation. I think that that's perfectly fair to say to the potential preacher, could you come and give a sermon next Sunday at our congregation? So there's lots of different techniques that you can use to try to make sure that your religious leader is somebody who you really like, and if it's not, you want to work with that leader to make that leader better, and that's a whole other kind of a discussion of having input to say to the new pastor, well, here you should do A, B, and C, and make some good suggestions. In most cases, I found the religious leader is very happy to have suggestions from the congregation. He or she wants to be a better pastor, and getting ideas they welcome the ideas rather than being negative.
Well, I think any pastor that doesn't want feedback from his congregation is asking for an empty church.
That's right. That's right. And I think you're absolutely right that's where people vote. They just don't come the next Sunday, and they don't say why.
Right. That's what I meant.
On the other hand, I think part of it, Royce, is that in many congregations, they don't have a system, so that they don't say to the congregation, we're going to have an evaluation of Father Smith in 3 months. Please, if you have comments, send them to the chairman of the council, and here's his or her email address. So you want to also think of ways of getting input. One of the things in the literature I read is that most churches, the pastor wants the input, because most of it's good. I mean, we're thinking a lot of times that evaluation is negative, but it isn't. The pastor sitting there has no clue whether he's doing a good job or not, and he welcomes this opportunity for the congregation to say, boy, that pastor, these sermons are great, or, he really comforted me when I was sick. So a lot of the literature that I read, the articles, said it's the pastor's interest to hear what the congregation says, and if it's a negative thing, you're a pastor, you want to find out that somebody has a negative thing. You don't want
better to have them tell you than to have a church come up empty.
That's right, and I think that's an important thing. And then if it's something that can be helped, then the pastor says, boy, I just got this good idea from some members of the church, and why don't we have this activity or that? A lot of times that's what it is. It's a person saying, well, gee, I have an idea for a program I'd like to hear, and that's the comment rather than anything else. And it's a new idea, or I heard a speaker at another church who talked about a particular topic, or we don't have anything for I was in one where they didn't have anything for single parents, and the church members who were single parents said to the pastor, we think this is a need, and the pastor said, gee, I didn't think of that, and let's have a program for single parents with children. That was a need of the church. A lot of times the pastor doesn't know, because he or she is so busy getting ready for the sermon, that they just they don't talk to enough people, or a lot of churches have a program where volunteers visit homebound people. Well, there again, a lot of the homebound people don't speak up, where the hungry people in the church, they're too proud to say, you know what, I don't have enough money for good meals. But if you have a volunteer group who's tuned into that, they can find out, and they can set up Meals on Wheels programs that most churches have to visit the homebound, and also a food program of bringing food to those who ordinarily couldn't afford it.
And that happens a lot, especially in your bigger cities. There's so many families that are out of work, and there's a big need for outreach programs, in other words.
That's right. And a lot of times what happens is that those people who need help with outreach are too proud to ask. So a lot of times what happens is, if you're sitting in the church and and you're waiting for them to come to the door and say, please give me some food, they're not going to do it. You have to almost sell it, especially a proud family, like you say, that they were employed and they had money coming in, and then somebody got laid off. They don't have enough money to feed the family. In many cases, they're too proud to come to the religious leaders and say, you know what, could you help me out here? But if you have a group of volunteers that are sensitive and know they're church members, then they can go to that family and say, you know what, until you get a job, every Tuesday, every day somebody will come with a hot meal, and that's good. Or they'll set up a church a program where people can come and get food. I know it's not that complicated. In many communities where I live, there's a food program. There's a food bank that collects the food, and then they take it to the different churches. But you have to know, you have to store it and put it someplace and get it to the right people, and that takes a lot of organization. But if you do that, the food comes. You don't have to go and get the food. There's an organization that will supply the food to a large number of churches. All you have to do is sign up and make the arrangements, and the food arrives in a truck, and then you have to figure out a way of getting it to the families. And sometimes I've seen churches where they do it every Sunday after the service. You just go to a certain room in the church and you take as many things as you want. No questions asked. There's cans of stuff there, and you just take them home with you. Nobody even knows. You don't have to say, I need them. You just quietly go in and take what you want. So there's lots of, things churches can do if they think about them and they administer their work properly.
And, there's another thing that you're going to be covering in this book, I notice, is, this is something, again, I don't see a lot of it in the churches that I've been to, and that is conducting performance reviews of religious leaders. I mean, it's just like it's automatically assumed everybody's doing a great job, unless they're doing it in the back and nobody gets to know about it. But I was a Sunday school teacher, and I didn't have any reviews.
And I think that again, that we have a negative view. I think the problem is that when you say the word performance review or evaluation, unfortunately, and it has to do generally with what you have at your business, it has a negative thing, and people say, I've heard this, why should we evaluate Father so-and-so? He's doing a great job. Well, that's not what an evaluation is. It's an evaluation to tell Father so-and-so he's doing a great job, and to encourage him to do that. So I think the first thing is that every single person, and I say that without exception, in any job, anywhere should be evaluated, so that you don't pick sides. It's not, you only evaluate some people. You evaluate everybody, and then nobody's going to say they're treating me different. So it's not the pastor, it's the choir master and the secretary. I'm even in favor of having volunteer evaluations. I mean, when I do board training of churches, I will argue that the board members should be evaluated, but let's stick to the religious leader, certainly to have an evaluation, program, once a year maybe for somebody who's been there a while, and to start off. One of the things that I just think is great is to having a self-evaluation. I think that's important. So you say to the religious leader, Pastor, next month, would you write one up for us? Talk about the things you do that you want us to know about, and also if there's areas that you need some assistance, like for example, you want to go to a conference to learn something, let us know about that. Or that you want some help from the congregation. There's a particular program that you want that you need more volunteers for, let us know that. And I found that a very interesting tool where you're starting off not with the evaluation from the church people, but from the pastor himself. So you have that. Then you have some sort of a committee. What I like is a committee that works with the religious leader all year long. rather than, one that swoops down once a year and does an evaluation. I like a system where you have 3 or 4 church leaders that meets with the religious leader regularly and then does this evaluation at the end of the year. So you've already met with the religious leader, and that's helpful. And then some input from the congregation, to give the congregation, and to also tell the congregation that this would be a note from, let's say, the chairman of the council, to say we want things positive, to explain to them that this is not a negative thing. Tell us the good things that that the religious leader has done in the last year, and make some suggestions for improvement. So you get 3 things: you get the self-evaluation, you get the committee's evaluation, and you get the input from the congregants. And then you put it together, and I always think it's good. Most of the time, this has been my experience, when that 3-part evaluation is done and finished, the religious leader says, you know what, I was a little worried, but now that I've seen it, that's really a good tool. One of the commentaries I saw that's quoted in the book is a pastor that says, I insist on it because my congregation doesn't know how many nights a year I'm staying up when a family calls me in the middle of the night when there's a death. And they don't know that in one part I worked at 37 straight days. I didn't have a day off. And he says, I think the evaluation is a tool for me so that I can explain to the congregation all the good things I did. And he says, I think it's wonderful. So if you take that positive kind of an outlook as you're the pastor, that you think it's the greatest thing there is, then it's no problem. And then if there's something, a complaint of the congregation, you learn about it. And like you say, you want to learn about it in that way rather than, having the last 7 rows empty.
That is true. And I think a lot of it also goes to the actual religious leaders themselves. Some of them might lack confidence and may be afraid of reviews. I mean, I think that they've done as well as they have. And, I think in a lot of cases, though, the people that do the reviews could say, maybe post on the church bulletin board, so-and-so did this here, showing the good parts of the reviews that would maybe ease the tension some, in other words.
Well, and also put it in the church bulletin. That's what a church bulletin is for, to say we finished a review of such and such, and did you know, congregation, that here's some things we didn't even know? Did you know that our religious leader, goes to the prison once a week, and he remember that he visits the sick, and here's a list of things that your religious leader did. I saw that very effectively, a real example. Here's the things your religious leader did in the last month. Just listing them. And the people say, wow, I didn't know he did all those things. He helped he counseled couples who were getting married. He talked to somebody who lost a spouse. He went to the prison. He helped in the food bank, and on and on and on and on. I think generally that most preachers I know do lots of good work that nobody even knows about because it's part of what they do, and they're not very good at publicizing what they do, and a lot of times it takes a real good chairman of the board to praise that religious leader and to tell the congregation, hey, we've got a real good guy here. He gave, indication at this, and he went with this, and he did 7. Did you know he did the eulogy at 11 funerals this month? I mean, a lot of times what happens is you have a church where elderly people are, and nobody knows. A high percentage of those people died, and here's this pastor. It's hard to do a eulogy. I mean, I don't think any lay person would ever want one. Of all the things that a pastor does, I think that's the hardest one for a lay leader to understand, how you would do a whole eulogy and bury the dead and stuff. That's what pastors do. And when you tell the pastor, boy, you really did a great job and we really appreciate what you did, that's good stuff to do. And also to tell the members that we really have a gem here in our pastor. That's good stuff to know, and that's another thing that the evaluation will do to show all the wonderful things that religious leader did.
This is true. And I also noticed on here you got one for increasing volunteers, and this is an area that I've heard tell in different businesses and different churches and all sorts of things that has an administrative end seems to be a hard thing to do, is getting volunteers to actually get involved to doing something themselves. So I'm sure you got ways that could really motivate people to want to volunteer, right?
Well, one of the easy things, and again, it starts simply, is just a list of volunteer opportunities, just to know what there is, so that otherwise you wouldn't know what you can volunteer to do, and so a good list. And remember, some of the things you need to be at the church for, so tell them, and some of the things you can do at home, and you want to put that on the sheet, this one you can do at home. Some of the volunteer things require a certain amount of hours, and some of them don't. Some of them require certain kind of skills, and some of them don't. So the first thing to do is to list the different opportunities to volunteer and what the requirements are. That's one. And then the second thing, you have to publicize it. So I always like church bulletins as a way of doing that, to send it to them by hard copy and also on the computer to say, here's, some volunteer opportunities, and here, if you want to volunteer, here's who you contact. So you have that thing. And then what I suggest that you do, and again, I put in the book, and I think this is important, is to have some sort of interviewing system, so that if somebody wants to be a volunteer, they go to somebody, usually a coordinator of volunteers. Most of the time it's another volunteer. And you go into that person, and that person says, here's a list of things we need. We need somebody in the office to get out big mailings. We need somebody to help with the Girl Scouts. We need somebody to work on the senior citizen committee and help us make lunch. And list them, and then say to the potential volunteer, tell us what your skills are. Or else in the book there's a one-page sheet where you fill out. It says, these are the skills that I have. And then you match them up, and you say to the volunteer, look, you really are an excellent cook. Why don't you come and we've got programs that we need help in the kitchen, or you've really worked with young people, and man, do we need some help with our teen program or our preschool program in our church. So I think that's one of the things you can do. One is to have a list of tasks, a list of volunteer opportunities, and then secondly, to publicize that throughout the church community. And then the third one is to have some sort of a volunteering a system of actually interviewing. And then the other thing I think is important, and most churches don't do it, is a nice short orientation program. An hour or two, telling the people basic questions about volunteering. Stuff like how do you get into the church when it's locked, where are the bathrooms? I mean, some of it is how to do the job, but others of it is just sort of general questions. If you're in the church and somebody comes in and wants to know about the church, what do you do? What's the system here? What do you do if you're a volunteer and you're unhappy about an assignment? This is at the orientation. How do you handle that? And just a general orientation for volunteers, because a lot of times if you're a volunteer, you don't get the supervision that you really should get. Nobody tells you, would you take Mrs. Jones to the doctor? And a lot of times you have an idea, but you don't present it to anybody because nobody ever asks you. You're on a committee and something's done that you don't like, but nobody asks you, so you keep doing stuff that you don't, you don't like. I just got one, for example. I got invited to an event from a religious group, and it had the date and the place. It didn't have the time. And I'm thinking, somebody messed up here. didn't somebody at the church read the card before it went out? I mean, that's not a good system. And they obviously forgot when I called up and said, "What time is it?" They said it's on the card, and I said, "No, it isn't." And then they said, "Whoops!" I guess we
open mouth, insert foot, and chew vigorously.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a volunteer task. Well, obviously, what happened there is somebody on the committee didn't look at the card before it went out, and stuff. But that happens. That's a problem. You don't have a good committee, or somebody didn't look at it, and it's a problem. A lot of times, what you find is that a volunteer doesn't get told in the orientation that they represent the church, and that if they volunteer for something, they better do it. Like if you're going to pick up Mrs. Jones at 2:00 to take her to the doctor, man, you have to. If you're not coming, you have to let her know. You can't just say I'm a volunteer and I'm not coming. I mean, you have an absolute obligation, whatever it is, to call somebody or call the secretary at the church or whatever it is, to say I'm not feeling well, and somebody else has to take Mrs. Jones to the doctor. So the attitude of many volunteers of I can do what I want is you have to explain to them that that's not so, that you represent the church when you're a volunteer, and you can't do what you want. You have to do it within the rules of that particular church. So it's sometimes tricky. What if you're in the church and you're a volunteer and you see people doing drugs? Well, man, you got to know what to do. That's a tough decision to make as a volunteer, and that's the kind of thing you should be told in the orientation. So immediately you know what your responsibility is. You just, in a church setting, you can't just go home and not tell anybody. That's not what churches are for. They're for making people, better and stuff. So some of those things you run into in a volunteer, pretty, sticky kind of stuff, and you really are representing the church when you're a volunteer. So it's like everything else we talked about, Royce. It seems simple, but when you're into it, it's harder than you think.
That old saying, I've seen the boss's job and I don't want it.
That's about it. And I think that's true. A lot of volunteers, if you say, I'd like to pay you, they say, oh, no. You couldn't pay me enough to do that job, but as a volunteer, I'm happy to do it. So I think that's funny, and you're absolutely right. I don't think very many people would like a pastor's job these days. That doesn't seem to be something that a lot of people want. They may say they want to do it, but when you really tell them how many hours that pastor works and how many nights he got awake and how many days that he worked 7 days, because, one of the weird things about churches is that pastor works on Sunday. So you can't, it's for you. If you're a regular 5-day-a-week person, that Sunday's a day off. Hey, if you're the pastor, that Sunday's a work day. And the Saturday is too, because that's the day when you're getting ready to give the sermon. So if you don't give that pastor Tuesday off or Wednesday, they can burn out really fast. I've seen pastors who just never had a vacation, or else even in the summertime.
Oh, they're like doctors. They're on call.
Yeah, and a lot of churches, they can't even go away. And I say, that's not right. You have to be able to say to the pastor, for these 2 weeks, if somebody passes, they just do, and you have to have an arrangement with the church down the street. We can't have you have to come back from your personal vacation in order to do this eulogy. But that's a discussion you have to have with the pastor of every single church before something happens, so that you know what the rules are. Does that pastor have to come back from their personal vacation down the shore to do that eulogy? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, I guess, but that's one of the things that you have to talk about. You don't want to wait until you make a decision and then have every person Sunday morning having a discussion of did the pastor do the right thing? That's not how you want to deal with a problem like that.
Well, I went to a Lutheran church once that they had an assistant pastor, which I think worked probably pretty nicely.
Yeah, and in larger churches, that's what happens. But in a lot of churches, you don't have an assistant pastor because the church isn't large enough, and then, what do you do in a case like that? Remember I haven't seen the numbers, but the vast, vast majority of churches are less than 100 parishioners. So they're small churches around the country. We read about the big ones because that's what we read about in the paper, but that's not what is happening. The vast majority of them are small because you don't have to register. The good thing about this country in the First Amendment is if you're a church, you're a church. You don't have to ask the government for anything. You don't have to do anything. You just say, I'm a church, and you're a church. And that's good, I think, for our country that we have that system. I think that's wonderful, but what that means is that a lot of churches financially are in big trouble because they don't have enough members to support the church, and nobody's around to pay the salary at the end of the month. So that's another issue I dealt with, is to have a budget so you at least know that how much is coming in and how much is going out, and you can talk about issues like how to raise more money.
Which is very important, because without the money, how do you pay the lights and all of that?
Right.
But one of the things I wanted to ask you, Mike, because it's like 9 minutes till, or 8 minutes till 8, my time anyway. We've been on almost an hour. I didn't think to cover this with you prior to the show, and I sure dropped the ball. I've been, heavily loaded with shows this week. This is conference season, and you go pretty much on call yourself. But
good. What can I help you with?
But I was going to ask you, did you want to go 1 hour or 2, or an hour and a half, or?
Well, I think an hour is fine. When you're finished asking your questions, then I'll be done. Whatever time that is, it's up to you. I can go for days.
Okay.
I think an hour is good. I think that's about, for your readers, your listeners, about an hour. They have to get up and get some coffee at some point, Royce.
Right. Well, I was going to say also, a lot of these shows, if you do put them on YouTube or somewhere like Daily Motion, if it's an hour and 18 seconds, they won't take it.
Right. Well, let's go with the 8 more minutes and quit then. We don't want them to turn us off, so we got 8 more minutes. What can I help you with? Okay. Well,
we've covered a good sized chunk of the book. I know we still got the establishing a religious leader liaison committee, and we already talked a lot about increasing membership, but we haven't covered firing volunteers or knowing your members. I don't know which one you would think would be the prime one to bring out. I know that one of them that I would target if it was me would be knowing your members, because there's just so much involved in knowing your members. It helps you to know, who would be a good volunteer for what and what you can expect from them. And actually knowing them is what also keeps them coming back, because they like to come to somebody they feel is a friend.
Well, that's true. What I think was that a church could do is every church set up a council. I really think it's a good idea. A group of lay leaders that meet on a regular basis to talk about some of these issues. In every case, the pastor's there to give his or her comments and to talk about this. How do we get members? And just what you said, how do we get to know what our members want? Are we meeting the needs of our members? How do we know that we are or we're not? And even stuff like who's filling the pews on Sunday. Are we getting a good portion of younger people? That's something that every church should be concerned about. We don't want... it's very important to start with them when they're 3. I mean, I was going to say Sunday school, but I don't even want to wait till they're 5. I mean, let them come when they're 3 and learn about that particular holidays and stuff. And it's 3 till you die. I mean, really, in the church there should be things for everybody. And so one of the ways you do that, I think, is by having this council of volunteers that meets regularly and talks about at each meeting some of these things. So that's a structural kind of thing, but I think that's important. And also, if you have a council, you want to have some way of getting ideas, and even if it's a suggestion box, or the council chair in the bulletin every month puts his or her email address and says, I really want your ideas. Send me an email or give me a phone call. really to say to the people in the pews, and I think it's really important, this is your church. I think it is so important that a person says, I'm really proud, I'm in this church, and whatever it is, and I'm real happy to be there, and I would recommend that anybody in the community go to that particular church. I think that's so important, and that one of the ways you do that is by saying, does everybody feel good about, being in this church? And that feeling good is contagious. I mean, I've been to churches where you could walk in on Sunday and feel it. I mean, you can just see that people are happy and they're there, and then I've been in churches where same thing. You walk in on Sunday and people are, they run away after the services are over. They don't greet their friends. There's no food. I mean, one of the things about a good church, in my view, and this is a biased view of churches, is I think every church ought to have good food. That's another way of getting your members to come back, is give them something to eat that's good. So I think you're absolutely right that you need some sort of a system for getting people involved, and one of them is having this church council as part of a way of running the church.
And I would agree with you. Now, we've got 3 minutes left, and I want to tell everybody not to forget to come back Saturday. I'll be talking to, I had it right in front of me just a second ago. Okay, Bernardo Kastrop, and he's got a book out called Dreamed Up Reality, and he's going to tell us a little bit about that there book and about his views and his research that went into this book. And I want to thank all the listeners for coming. I couldn't have a show without you. And don't forget to drop by here, sign up for the newsletter to keep you informed. And, if you like the show, somebody else probably will too. Make sure you share the link, pass it around, and, get people here. We have everything archived so that if you don't make it when the show's live, you can listen to it later. It's always, good to be live. You can call in and participate. But, hey, if you can't make it live, it's still there to listen to, and it's still a great show. This one here I thought was very informative, especially to, people that might want to run a religious organization. And I'd like to ask you, Mike, if you'd like to come back again sometime in the future. You've been a good guest.
Well, sure. And the other thing you can do, Royce, is as people call in and say, we didn't have questions. I've got a question for Mike. Why don't you just, gather them together, get back to me, and then we can have I'd be happy to come back anyway. But if there's an opportunity to answer any questions from the listeners, I'd certainly be happy to do that.
Okay, and I'll make sure that gets around. It's a good thing you said that, because as people come and listen to the archive, if they have questions, they'll be able to contact me or you one. I know they can contact you through your website.
Well, you know what? Let them contact you, because if they contact you, you can put them all together.
Okay.
If they contact me, I don't know what to do. So tell them if they have questions to contact you, and then you can get 3 or 4 questions, and I'd be happy to answer individuals by, if you email me, but I certainly think it'd be fun. I'll get together again. You'll ask me the questions on the air, and we can have, a call-in show or anything. See if there's interest, and if there people have questions and they say, gee, Royce, I wanted to ask the guy this, tell them to contact you, and then let me know, and we can get back again and have questions. I'd certainly like to hear from religious leaders as to things they've done in their church, what worked in your church. I think it'd be great if your people in the pew said, hey, in my church, this is what worked, and if we can share it with other people, I think that'd be a great opportunity to help other religious organizations.
I think you're right.
Yeah. And also tell them it doesn't make any difference what your religious group is. One of the things I found in doing my work is it turned out that it didn't make any difference whether you were Mormon or Muslim or Catholic or what, that the problems of religious organizations seem to be universal. So that's another question for your readers, is to, in your particular faith, does it make a difference what are some of the problems that you've had, and we'll test the waters. We'll see if all religious organizations have the same kind of problem, because I think they do, but I have no way of knowing. So your readers would certainly know. Your listeners, I'm sorry, would certainly know.
Oh, yeah, I'm quite sure of that.
Well, ask them and get back to me. It was fun to talk to you.
Okay, look, I will do it. And thanks for coming. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
And listeners, I want to thank you guys for attending, and don't forget to contact me. You can also leave a note in my forums. Mike, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
I'm going to stay in touch.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Bye-bye.